I've played tons of video games over a wide spread of genres throughout my career on Twitch and YouTube, and the one genre that I neglected for a long time was role-playing games, and I was even more discriminate against Japanese role-playing games, and I have my reasons. For those of you who don't know, sitting in front of a camera playing JRPGs can be incredibly boring, and it can be quite off-putting to put down the controller and come back a day later. That all changed once I played a few strong JRPGs with captivating storylines, wonderful combat mechanics, and from that point on, I was all for checking out the genre. Now, a year ago I made a video known as the top 10 best JRPGs I've played to date, and since then I've checked many more out. So what does my top 10 list concerning JRPGs look like now? That's the purpose of today's episode, to give you that update, and in another year's time, I'll be back doing it all over again. Let's begin. Chrono Trigger was a massively fun game. To me, it's one of the best examples of what happens when you give a damn about making nearly everything perfect in a game, from the artwork to the music to the game flow, the dialogue, especially on the Super Nintendo. But I never owned a PS1, so I missed out on the follow-up Chrono Cross, which is fine because it was knocked down from spot 10 to spot 13. Instead, for spot 10, I'm choosing Final Fantasy Adventure. For those of you who don't know, Final Fantasy Adventure is essentially Secret of Mana Zero. It was the first game in the series, and when I talk about it to others, it seems like they never knew it existed, which is funny because I find it to be a charming little game. We play as a gladiator that escapes captivity, who meets up with other folks like Fuji, and throughout our journey we learn about our connection to the Tree of Mana. It's a solid game that previously was in spot 7, so it did drop a little bit, but this is still a great game. Even if it ever got knocked out from the top 10, for the Game Boy, it's one of my favorite JRPGs. Final Fantasy IV, or 2 if you're from the US region, was a great game, absolute banger, another example of Square doing it right. But the thing is, as much as I enjoyed playing it, I don't remember much about it. I found it to be more forgettable than Final Fantasy V and VI, of which I have willingly chosen to forget about 5 because that game can choke on a bad dragon for all I care. Fuck Final Fantasy V. While it was nice playing as Cecil and fighting with folks like Rydia and Rosa and Edge and just absolutely donkey punching Golbez, it was incredibly satisfying, I have to move Final Fantasy IV to spot 12 in favor of Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, which was previously in spot 6. Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei is the father of the Shin Megami Tensei / Persona line. There was one other game that came out in tandem known as Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei Monogatari, but that game, it blows. So instead, I translated DDSMT for the Famicom and rode the lightning. This game is epic. It's basically Pokemon, but instead of it being lovable characters that stood the test of time, it's demons. We can recruit demons. We can merge them into stronger demons, and yeah, it's fun. Honestly, had it not been for this game, I don't know if I would like dungeon crawlers as much as I do now. I mapped the rooms, I learned the mechanics. This was a solid game, and at some point I do hope to play the second one in the series so that I can work my way into the Shin Megami line of games. The Seventh Saga is a game that a lot of people are scared of because it's hard, stupid hard, one of the hardest games on the Super Nintendo. It's a mean-ass JRPG with very unpredictable mechanics tied to the NPCs that coexist in your world, because at any point, the other NPCs or even your partner can betray you. And if that betrayal occurs, it can ruin your game. But there was a better choice for spot 8, and while I still do adore the Seventh Saga, this spot is currently better occupied by Shining in the Darkness. Shining in the Darkness was spot 5 for a while, and between me and you, when it comes to JRPG experiences, especially on the Genesis, this is a damn good game. Popping art, great music, it was the start of the Shining series, and it came out swinging. I'm not sure why they made the executive decision to keep bouncing between this dungeon crawler style and a tactical RPG, but it is what it is. My next Shining game is Shining Force on the Genesis, and I'm curious to see how it plays. Previously, this spot was occupied by Final Fantasy Adventure, which was a phenomenal game on the Game Boy, one of my favorites, but we've already covered it. So what took the spot? Coming down from spot 4 to spot 7 is Wild Arms. Now, the PS1 was a bastion of quality JRPGs. So many different franchises really had the opportunity to shine, and in many ways, the developers who created these franchises could shine. Wild Arms was created by Media Vision. Prior to Wild Arms, they really only had 2 games under their belt: Crime Crackers, a weird action RPG, and Rapid Reload, which was basically a clone of Gunstar Heroes. Prior to being a company, many of the folks who would become Media Vision were former employees of Riot, a subsidiary of Telnet Japan, who created the Tenchi no Uda series. So to break away from a well-known company, create your own studio, and have the luxury of being one of the first companies to develop on the PS1, you need to kick ass. And to me, they did, because Wild Arms is insanely fun, like beyond fun, stupid fun. Literally everything about this game is impressive to me. The load times between locations and buildings, the music, the game flow, the artwork. It took the aesthetic of the late Super Nintendo era JRPG and it made it work. And that's not something I say lightly. If you want a good, solid, easy to approach RPG, this is a good starting point, at least on the PS1. I do suggest it to everyone. Digital Devil's Story Megami Tensei was impressive, but there were things in it that were frustrating. The big thing being the whole dungeon crawl maze, traveling over and over and over again. It had a lot of backtracking. And before anyone pops in the comments saying, "Who's gonna tell him?" Trust me, I know, the series is the same and it really hasn't changed for a while. But with DDSMT being knocked down, I wanted to replace this with a quality game that in some ways kickstarted my interest in actually checking out JRPGs, Final Fantasy. For those of you who have never gone back and played the original one, it's very much a product of its time. Similar to Dragon Warrior, the tropes and gimmicks were being ironed out, they were being created. This was uncharted territory, and between me and you, I much prefer Final Fantasy I to Dragon Warrior 1. At least I feel there's more plot to parallel the amount of grinding that I'm doing, which if you aren't streaming this and just know, sitting in a chair staring at a TV, you'll want that plot. It makes the game more palatable. Final Fantasy is still fun to me, and at some point I think I'd like to go back and check out the Pixel remasters to see exactly what they fixed. Shining in the Darkness was an experience. I was beyond impressed by the artwork, the music, and for the first time in my life, I was impressed by the economy of equipment. Shining in the Darkness had this dope mechanic where instead of buying and selling, I could just buy the equipment I want with the equipment I already had. Think of it as offsetting the cost. I've seen it more and more as a trope in the games I've been playing, and I hope it stays. It takes the guesswork out of everything. But as much as I love Shining in the Darkness, there was another game that I played that kind of beat it, Tengai Makyo Jiraiya. This is a PC Engine CD-ROM game, and yes, that's how it's pronounced. I don't make the rules. For those who do care about the PC Engine CD games, this is known in English as Far East of Eden. And in the game we play as Jiraiya. He's a hot-headed little asshole that we control the whole time going through Jipang, trying to find the big bad evil guy, Masakado, who's actively trying to ruin life as we know it. He's being resurrected by these goons who worship him, and as we go through Jipang, we'll encounter members of this cult. What appealed to me with this is that it had Red Book audio. The game is incredibly linear, the dialogue is funny, the combat mechanics are very direct, and it's just good, clean fun. I wanted to play the sequel to this, Manjimaru, but unfortunately Far East of Eden, even from a traditional translation standpoint, incorporates a lot of humor, folklore, and over-the-top storytelling elements that are relevant to the Japanese culture. I was lucky to play the translation of Jiraiya, but I have to wait a little bit more for Manjimaru. But from what I did play, I can say it might make this list too. We're getting down to the best of the best that I've played, games that are incredibly difficult to move down on this list. To get this high up, the game really needs to impress me on a level that captivates me. It needs to catch me off guard, and that's not something that tends to happen anymore. Wild Arms was one of those lofty, whimsical adventures that caught my attention, but last year there was a game that knocked it severely out of the park, and that is Grandia. Grandia was created by Game Arts, and for a long time they just kind of made games that didn't really stand out. Thexter, Slipheed, maybe even Faria, World of Mystery and Danger. Finally, they found their sweet spot in storytelling and graphic design with a game called Lunar: The Silver Star, which I still haven't played, but I do know of it. A lot of people talk about it. Often. But Grandia, man. Ugh. I was kind of irritated in the beginning because it's one of those slow starter games, but once it picks up, boy, it fucks! And while I spent 40 plus hours killing things and listening to the plot, I found this game to be massively fun. Like, everything about it was great. The music, the combat, the dialogue, the characters themselves, the way we complete dungeons, the compass, I loved it. Another thing that gave me warm and fuzzies was our magic progression system. So the magic we have is dependent on how often we use it. Each spell has star levels and overall levels, and by gaining experience in casting spells, we can unlock other spells. In addition to that, we can use different weapons to unlock different special skills. So unlike Final Fantasy V, where I was grinding for a job, it was kind of interesting to rotate weapons around characters to level them up. For the PS1, this is a solid JRPG. I love Final Fantasy. Nothing will ever change that. It was the first JRPG I ever played, and it was the third game I ever streamed. In fact, when I became an affiliate on Twitch, this is exactly what I was playing. But nostalgia doesn't really matter to me when it comes to identifying exactly what JRPGs I like the most. So unfortunately, Final Fantasy is knocked down to spot 6, and in its place is the sequel to Grandia, Grandia 2. Now let's do some quick catch up. Grandia 1 was released in 1997 for the Saturn. The version I played was 1999's PS1 version. There is another game in the Grandia 1 universe known as Grandia Digital Museum, and it's a spin-off that occurs after the events of Grandia 1, but the whole purpose of it is to unlock all of this museum content about the game. So basically it's a bonus feature disc with combat. So for the order of release, I decided to continue on the main line of games, and who knows, maybe I'll go back and check it out at some point, but Grandia 2, I'm actually playing it right now, and I can see the writing on the wall that Grandia 2 is better than the first game in every single comprehensible way. You know that magic system I talked about? No need to grind anymore. Just fight often, and you get magic coins you can use to buy spells. Same with our special moves, same with our skills. And no more of this weapon change mechanic. Our characters only use one specific weapon. So that's one less thing I have to worry about, not that I'm complaining. I am actively working through this game. I don't know much about it, but I do think it's better than Grandia 1, and it needs to be here. I'm playing the Dreamcast version because that's the one everyone says it's better, but I don't know. I think the shortcomings on the PS2 version are negligible at best. For the remainder of this list, nothing has changed. Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy are still in their respective slots, and I'd be hard-pressed to find anything better than those games. Chrono Trigger to me is always ever so slightly before Final Fantasy III, and I say that because they are different styles of games. But it can be argued that these are kind of interchangeable. It really depends on if you want an action RPG or a straightforward Japanese role-playing game. It's tough to find words or even justification on how I itemize these games because the music is great in both of them, the story is wonderful in both of them, the artwork is amazing in both of them, the characters are relatable, the plot is direct, the struggles are real, and in both games the internal conflicts of every character are resolved. We aren't really left with any loose ends. So it all boils down to what I had more fun playing, and in the case of our top two, I enjoyed Chrono Trigger a little bit less than Final Fantasy III. There really wasn't a point in Final Fantasy III where I was irritated or frustrated. The way that Square managed to balance the highs and the lows are impressive. I haven't found another game that figured that out. I hope to, though. So those are my top 10 JRPGs as of 2025, and who knows, maybe in a few years I can look back and update this list as I continue to explore retro gaming. JRPGs are fun. I never thought I would say that, but they are fun. And it always boils down to the mechanics and how companies could make their games stand out in comparison to the established norm. What are your favorite JRPGs? I'd love to add them to the list of games to check out. By the way, if you made it to the end of this video, you're already home with our community. We're a group of like-minded individuals who love remembering when life was just a little bit easier to live, and if you align with that, feel free to subscribe. Finally, the single most important thing you can do for me is to hit that thumbs up button, as it directly affects the visibility of the videos and the projects that I work on every single day. And if you don't do it, you're a spoony bard! As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre, out.